So it is 11:02. So let me go ahead and do my formal introduction. Because you
Oh,
got a little
oh,
script. I'm
formal.
not very good at improv, so I have to write things down. So Alan's, as he says, has been playing and working on the web for basically since there was the web, 30 years now or more. Um, Graduate work in geology at was it the University of Arizona? I know it was in Arizona.
Arizona State, big difference.
Oh boy, that's a yeah, that's a big mistake on my part.
Not that I was into rivalries.
Yeah. So you very early back in that time, you found yourself getting into working with the web, working with academic technology. And then for about 15 years, you were an instructional technologist at Maricopa Community Colleges in Arizona. And then now, since the last decade or more of your career, you've been involved in a wide range of partnerships and consultancies with institutions of higher education literally around the world, um, especially in the U.S. and Canada, but other parts of the world as well. Jim mentioned yesterday you were part of a consultancy at UMW that was to help build DS-106 and the legendary DS-106. Alan grew up in Baltimore, and I think we're about the same age, actually. I'm not going to say what that age is, but I think we're really kind of within a year or so of each other. And strangely, um, you were probably, well, this isn't strange that you were a fan of the Baltimore Orioles baseball team when you were a kid, but so was I.
Great.
So I grew up in Texas, and we said, well, like, why are you a Baltimore? But it was for just a 2 or 3 year period because at that very particular time in the late '60s and early '70s, they were winners. I just wanted to be
Yeah.
a winner.
That's a smart strategy, right?
Yeah. So you had a reason to grow up in Baltimore, but I've always also felt like kind of a connection with Alan because in terms of reading his blog, among your many professional blogs, you've also uh, written movingly to me about your memories of your parents, and I believe your father was named Morris.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I always feel a connection with other Morrises in the world. There aren't that many of us. I don't know if he ever went by Mo.
No, he was Mickey sometimes, and he was probably not. He was called. He tanned very well, so his nickname was Blackie too,
Okay.
which is kind of now I almost hesitate to say that, but yeah,
Yeah.
but
Well,
he was Mars, yeah.
yeah. Final thing I just want to say before I turn it over, among the things I saw in the link list you sent us was some reference to the work of John Udell, and we looked at Jim also worked with us yesterday to look at his 7 ways of thinking like the web. And I just want to say that I really can't think of anyone else who embodies that better than you do, Alan. I mean,
Oh,
the generosity, the sharing, the openness, the creativity of the web, just exploring the possibilities. It's um, what a gift that's all been to us in higher ed. And so I thank you for that. I'm going to turn it over. We've been joined by one more colleague here from the library, Liz Rodriguez. Liz, hello.
that is.
Digital scholarship specialist. So Alan, I'll turn it over to you, and I think you've got some things to get us started, and then we'll work in see how the
Oh,
conversation unfolds.
I actually don't have a strict plan, so
Oh,
I'm
okay.
looking I'm
All
looking
right.
for some guidance. I mean, I can talk about like stuff, and now I feel like
Okay.
I remember when I started, I was like I knew nothing. Like my whole coming into this field was really an accidental path that I won't bore you with, but I don't I didn't really learn. There wasn't like a field of experts or a community to go to when I started this. So a lot of times, as places opened up on the internet, a lot of times they were email discussion lists, and you would actually run into someone. So very early on, I happened to run into this guy from Calgary named Darcy Norman. And so you find someone else who does that similar work in another institution. It's like, oh my God, we're the only people here who do that. So things are better now that there's definitely more of people who are engaged in this, especially the practitioners who are trying to put this technology to use. So
Okay. Well, I'll encourage our the folks here to kind of formulate uh, how you might want to pick your brain here over the next hour. But I'll kind of maybe get things started. Just like I said, you've worked with faculty and you've taught you yourself have of course taught many courses, and you've worked with closely with faculty at different institutions, ranging from schools like ours, small liberal arts colleges, to regionals, R1s, flagships, state flagships, other kinds of institutions. So um, maybe if you could start with just sharing, you know, a couple of what you would consider, I don't know, success stories in helping people think about the possibilities of what they can do with the domain, both professionally and especially in the pedagogical context of teaching and learning, because I know that's kind of, I think, been your focus.
Yeah. I mean, the best part about it, which is the fact that it represents, it's kind of shallow, but it does represent you. Like instead of like a lot of times with technology, you end up adapting yourself to a system or to what a platform or thing can do. Like all of a sudden you're presented with this. Now it's this bewildering array of like um, possibilities, and like it's not necessarily a solution to anything. It just creates the potential, and so I've had some good luck on stumbling into things, connecting with people, but a lot of it is trying and failing miserably a lot. So one of the things I learned when I started teaching is one of the first times I got to teach was when I was at UMW, and like I had no Jim through DS 106, and he was teaching a section, and I was teaching a section, and like and Martha Burtis was also teaching a section. So I love this idea of teaching in parallel, because we basically we didn't teach exactly the same things, but we worked together, and so we almost had like a cohort of a couple classes, but we also had our own ways of doing this. And so like Jim has his bombatic, brazen style, and he goes into class and he insults his students and they love it. And I couldn't do that. And so it took a while to kind of find my personality, like in doing it. And it probably, if you can track down my first students from that class, I don't know what they would say, but the biggest part that I learned very early on is that it's okay to mess up in public, and that seems like I think so many people are worried about like coming, because there's a lot to handle with technology, and like of course I don't want it to fail, but like there's like an opportunity like when it fails, because like it's not a problem, like because it's always going to fail on you. And so I used to start things like promising you, like I would come in and I would say, okay folks, I can guarantee you that something's going to go wrong with my session today or my workshop, or the technology is going to fail. And so I would always say, like, if it doesn't fail, then I've exceeded my expectations, but if it does fail, I've met them. But what happened a lot of times is in doing this stuff, because like we're creating content, we're building stuff. We're not just shoving it into the specific slots into a platform. Is that things will go wrong, links will break. I'll write something and I'll have the wrong instruction for a week, but like I correct it. And so what I like to think in all that is by like having these small little like human failures in public, is that I show you that I recover, and that I make a mistake, and it's okay for my students as well. Whether that makes sense or not, but like if you can relieve yourself of that pressure, like, oh my God, like it broke or it didn't work, that's not really the problem. The problem is not like, showing people that you're going to address and figure out how to solve it. And so, way back, in the early MOOC days, you remember the Georgia Tech thing? Like, there was this big open course, and I think they didn't realize if like 20,000 people jumped into a Google spreadsheet, it would go up in flames. And it did. And it was embarrassing to some degree because they had built it up. But I think they shut down the course. And so they basically just said, "Oh my God, this failure is so bad that they said we have to stop." And I don't know all the details of that decision, um, but there was a time when Jim and I were doing the first round of DS-106, and students got their own domains, and it was through a company that a colleague, Zach Davis, who's behind the Manifold program, brilliant. Um, but some previous, on a shared web server, some students' WordPress site wasn't updated, and some hacker named Omri came in and hacked like most of the students' blogs. And so, like the second week in the class, like they opened their WordPress site, and it's got like this black screen, and it says, Omri 5807, I've taken over your site. And so, of course, we were horrified, and like, what do we do about this? And so
Were they asking for ransom?
no, no, it was more of the kind of just like I'm showing my prowess kind of thing. I guess the stakes have gotten a little bit worse in some cases, but um, pretty much we just had, because the students hadn't really done much, they had to basically like delete a WordPress site and start again. And so we had to communicate what to do. Um, but we kind of took that as an opportunity. So Omri became a character in our class and our assignments. So we had things that we asked students to do to create messages, and so we just kind of rolled with it. And so it was like the worst case scenario that you think could happen for a class. Um, but you sort of say like, okay, it doesn't fall on me. Like, I'm going to be, I'm not going to like try to hide this and say like, oh, it's IT's fault or blame the technology. It's going to be like, okay, we had this bad thing happen, and what can we do with it? So it's easy to say in hindsight, but like, I know what happens when you're in a situation where you're responsible for the learning activities and everything goes up. But it kind of
Well,
helps if you can acknowledge that and sort of, you know, you know that it's going to happen and know that you're going to like remedy things and demonstrate that. I think that's an important lesson.
yeah, I think we've been doing some of that this week, actually. Just a reminder to folks, if the chat feature, you can put Q or C in there, or just type in your
Oh
chat.
yeah.
And Vanessa was saying she's always seen failures as an opportunity for students to see how I troubleshoot. And really they are. Um, they're prime learning opportunities if you can diagnose the cause of whatever the issue is, the breakdown, and then you do the repair, and then you come out understanding and knowing more than ever.
And it also shows, and this, the reason why I went back to that John Udell little bit was John Udell is he's a computer science like expert, and so he used to write for Byte magazine, like one of these early '90s magazines that were about technology, and so he was early into the internet, but he's really in the technical space. But
Yeah.
I don't remember how it happened that my colleague Gardner Campbell formed a relationship with him, and sort of John didn't really have a lot of experience in sort of education per se as a professional, but he's one of these people who kind of has his own natural insight and curiosity. And so, through those connections, I got a chance to sort of, interact with John on a lot and just learn from him. But this concept that he had early on made so much resonance is, in the early 2000s where people were discovering, the blogging platforms, those questions like, what am I going to write? Just like when Twitter came out, like the joke was, this is what I ate for breakfast. Um, but, you want to do something more substantial. And so um, what John had written that always stayed with me, and I still go back on it when I think about what I use that writing space for. Um, First of all, it's for me. I don't really, I mean, a lot of people are saying like, who's reading my site? I'm not getting any comments, or how many views I'm getting. And so in terms of the writing, and what I ask my students to think about is like, this whole space is a reflection space for you to benefit from. And if someone else gets a gain from it, that's like a bonus. Um, but John, he like spent a lot of time observing like programmer culture and understanding how they do. And what he found was that um, programmers, like on the side of the computer programming work that they do, whether it's in comments or in a journal format or in discussion boards, they talk about how they solve problems, and they sort of like do this idea, and I also reference Cory Doctorow's post, like thinking out loud.
Right.
And so John's sort of like question was like, what if more people just sort of, he had this phrase of narrating their work. So, um,
Mhm.
and so, we have skills and we do things in a certain frame. And so often we're focused on like doing the thing we're supposed to be doing. So if I'm a Ferrari repairman, if the Ferrari works, my work is done. Um, so, but he said, what if more people just were able to sort of like publicly sort of narrate how they go about solving problems? And John's always been interested in sort of how people think and approach situations. And sort of my frame of reference for this happened because when I was thinking about this at the time, like I had a plumber come to my house to fix the toilet, and so I'm really, I want the toilet to work, right? But like, I started thinking like, how does he approach the situation? Is he going through his list of experiences? Is he going through his what he knows like from a manual or from like a documentation specification? Like, how does he go about solving problems? I didn't really bother to ask my plumber, but like it's always interesting to know like how people sort of go about figuring things out. And so that's sort of my entry to using the blog was just sort of like starting to write about what I was thinking about, what I was mad about, what I wanted to figure out, how I tried to solve things. And so that's always been the primary purpose of the blog. At the same time, it enabled me to learn a lot about the WordPress platform and connect with others. Um, so there's like, now we're talking about, I mean, obviously you're probably using the WordPress platform to think about creating activities, experiences for students, or your course materials. And like, and not everybody's really, grasp onto this idea about using the blog also as a reflection space. So um, with the idea of a domain, like when I started out, I'm the case example is like I got this domain, back in the early 2000s, and I put my WordPress blog right on the front. Um, and so it wasn't really the concept of a domain where you had the capability to have these multiple different sites and areas, rooms in the Richard Scarry house, or I tend to think of like a land metaphor where you might build different buildings and structures. The garage for the Ferrari and the shed for storing, your gardening supplies. That you can almost have very different functioning spaces that aren't necessarily even connected to each other. And that's one of the affordances that we have, is that you can think about having, places where you're creating your course content or your research material or just your side interests. And then, do, if it really works for you. And again, I can't really prescribe that the blogging like I do is going to work like everybody else. And so one of the things, I'd like to encourage you to think about is, don't just look for like my approach to be the one that's going to work for you. And so like pick and choose that from examples that you see other people doing, is some of the best ways to go about this. Um, so I strayed far from your examples, some of the best examples for teaching and learning. Um, when in 8-10 years ago, coming out of DS 106, we were really hopped up on the idea of people like doing this. And so we have the idea where you ask students each to set up their own site, where they do their work in a space of their own, and we use this feed WordPress plugin that brought it into a course site. And it worked really well. And so I did that on many projects. I wrote up, and there's a link in there, sort of like a guide that other faculty managed to use. It's pretty complex, and like, feed WordPress doesn't always work how you want. But if that is sort of like a mode that works for you, where you want students, you want to sort of have them sort of publish their material, and there's sort of a somewhat of a difference when you publish your work in your house versus in Alan's house or Mo's house or Vanessa's
Mhm.
house. Um, but there were other times later on when it sometimes felt like it was asking a lot of students to sort of take on learning WordPress and learning what's a post versus a page. And so I've done some other projects where it just seemed relevant have students like share writing in a common space. So there, it was a site where we just had gave multiple authors to places. So
Yeah.
there's nothing pure about having it to be this distribution system of students writing in their own space or publishing. Um,
Yeah, we talked a little bit this morning actually and did some demo about the concepts of syndication and publishing on the one end, and then aggregation and subscription on the other end. And we looked at RSS and Feedly and some examples of that. I do want to come back to well, there are a number of things. Your mention of this concept of narrating your work or thinking out loud and how that can work in the undergraduate context. But we do have a question in the chat from Liz. She just
yeah.
needs a little bit of the background on what DS-106. What is this DS-106 thing everybody talks about?
Didn't Jim cover that yesterday?
Liz wasn't
Yeah,
here yesterday.
yeah,
She
that's okay.
here today.
That's okay.
But
That's a little bit of a joke.
the condensed version.
Jim and I like to tease each other. I hope I condensed it. But more or less, this was it was a it was an elective at University of Mary Washington that Jim taught. It was like CIS 106 or something, and sort of it was a digital storytelling class where the teacher before had done things like, had students learn about the principles of digital storytelling, learn like producing video, and Jim really wanted to sort of like, what does this mean on the web? So anyhow, he taught the class where his students sort of did this. They went through these different assignments to create media, a lot of web-based media, um, and but also to like publish it on their own sites. And so but he did it openly, and so like I was interested in like, because I had an interest in digital storytelling. um, but someone, it was actually a colleague of mine, Donna Gaudette, who was a math faculty at Scottsdale Community College, asked Jim at a conference. He says, this is really great what you Jimmy do, but what are you going to open this up so other people can participate? So that was the idea about taking this course that is being taught on the ground at a certain place, but enabling other people to participate openly as doing some of the same activities that they wanted to. And that was sort of the first iteration. So it's a digital storytelling class, um,
Yeah.
and the basic premises are, talk about some elements of storytelling and then have people participate in creating audio, video, graphic. It's kind of a introductory level to basic media creation, but it's about expressing yourselves on the web. And um, it almost became like a community and cult at the same time the early MOOCs were taking off. Um, and
Well,
so,
a lot of the versions of DS-106 would then have a specific theme, like it would be around vampires, or you were going to do one on westerns
yeah,
that I
yeah.
think didn't maybe didn't make, but so it would kind of attract a community not only around these tools of digital media production, but also kind of in a certain kind of idea space.
Well, and there was something, I mean, I remember when Jim first talked about the theme, I was like, we don't need a theme. But then it made sense because it gave some reference to frame the assignments around. So like one year he taught it with a Twilight Zone theme. And so like, if you don't, if you're like a kid with me who grew up watching a Twilight Zone, I could latch onto it. But if you didn't, then you learned something about it. So it wasn't required to understand the theme, but it became an interesting, more or less. I kind of picked up that thematic idea with just about every other thing that I've done, and sort of like create a metaphor that we wanted to teach around. So there was a project I listed there, the UDG Agora. It was a project I worked on where it was some faculty development with the University of Guadalajara in Mexico. Um, and so it was all about introducing them to mobile technology and sort of like small activities that they could, change one part of their class in the following semester. And we were introducing a lot of like methodologies and teaching strategies and technologies. But when I first showed up, they had like a planning document, and I said, "Wait a minute, I need a metaphor to work with here." And so the metaphor for me is it helps shape, you know, not only the design but the thinking about what I want to create. And so and I didn't want to make the metaphor for these people I was working with. And um, you know, they talked about this concept of an agora, which I thought was strange that people in Mexico had this concept of what I thought was a Greek terminology, but it's a Spanish word too, and it made sense in the evenings when we walked around the streets of the city, that people gathered just to be social in the city square. So like finding that metaphor to me is really relevant to the way I like to teach. And sort of like to have something to anchor a course experience into. For other people, it might be a distraction, but the metaphor is always kind of important to me.
Right, right. I know we have some questions, some interest in talking about spots, and maybe, and you know, you mentioned the kind of the one word, the one model of a course site where students um, have their own sites, and then their content is syndicated into a main course site. And I don't, we don't have that model operative here. I've used it at a different school. We do have people, I think mostly who, with their WordPress course sites here, they set it up and then install the students as users in that site, and then the students respond to blog posts, you know, respond to prompts with writing, or they get a page on the site and can post their video and things like that. So maybe we can look at Splots and look at those models. Um, before that, I just want to get your thoughts on again on this question of working in public, narrating your work, thinking out loud, however you want to describe that. And I think you've certainly been an exemplar of that. And I think one of the challenges we face in the undergraduate context, especially at Grinnell, is that it is of balancing the value of that, the
Mhm.
value of exposing your writing or production in whatever medium to a broader audience, with concerns for um, the appropriateness of that at a particular developmental stage of one's learning in a discipline,
Mhm.
the concerns about the appropriate privacy and security concerns that need to be taken into account, and at times just the reluctance. And I'm not making a real evaluative statement here, but just the reluctance of students to have their work visible.
Right.
And of course, we're very attentive to FERPA requirements and things like
Mhm.
that. So, I mean, do you have any thoughts, just kind of on how in your experience, how schools have navigated that set of issues?
Um, well, I don't know if I can speak about the school's approach that broadly. First of all, it's like it can't just be like open because I say it's great or for the sake of the open. So it's got to do something for the students. So I know in my first media classes, like I try to make a case for like, you know, this is why, you know, you should do, you know, use openly licensed media, or you should, you know, pay attention to Creative Commons, or why you should share your work. And I just saw eyes glaze over, and basically they would do it because I was saying it was important, and um, it didn't really have any relevance to them. So I kind of backed away from sort of like starting out with the importance of that. And so what I would get them to is just that like tune them into places as they're working on their media projects, that there's really like good quality places that people are creating it, that are free to use, but also they're shared by other individuals. And so all they're sort of asking for it's sort of like, if you use it, to like, you know, to give them credit, but the fact that they don't have to worry about the bad copyright police, which is always kind of like a dark ominous threat. um, but also I ended up creating like some different media activities where students would just reuse each other's media, like some basic remix things. And so the idea about their work getting reused within a smaller context of people that they may know through the class. And so to get them some sense of experiencing why sharing something could be of value for them in that sort of exchange, rather than just saying like, oh, it's good and you should do this because I say so, because that doesn't necessarily work. In terms of the open, and it's the same thing as like, you know, if I'm saying there has to be a reason why I want my students to do work openly. So, you know, those classes I was teaching early on, some of it was about understanding like network interaction and like what happens in sort of the way people can connect, and you know the way it led to this kind of exchange here. And so it was to give them experiences of understanding whether it's social media or media sharing, or things that could say like there's a value to this. And so that wouldn't necessarily apply when I'm teaching, you know, a mineralogy class. Um, so the other way coming about this is to thinking about like, um, what are the things that you can do? You know, I heard some mention of like Wikipedia, like writing and getting involved in that side. It's like, what are things you can do that can contribute to public knowledge or to public good? And so there's some really good activities going on with some work I'm involved now, and where teachers are sort of like aligning assignments and activities with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And so what it means is like taking these kind of broad things which are, you know, good for the world, and asking students to do activities that sort of like apply it in their community or where they live, or to sort of like bring it home. And so if you're asking students to do work openly, you know, it should have a purpose, and it shouldn't just be because it's hanging out there open. And so, I mean, my approach with, you know, my later courses were, um, first of all, is like, it was never a requirement that, you know, students in the network narratives class that I taught for a couple of years with Mia Zamora at Kean University, we never said you have to be on Twitter. So we always gave students the option about what to do. But also, like I always emphasize in the beginning, is like, um, when you set up your blog, or when you set up your Twitter account, you don't have to use your name. You don't have to identify yourself. And so it was amazing. I was rather surprised that students often would create, you know, accounts with their name right in the account name. And like, you know, like I have this stupid cogdog thing, which is a totally made up word, and that's my identity. And so I would really encourage students to think about like representation of themselves, even when they set up, like if, you know, we had them usually set up a lot of their blogs on WordPress.com or Blogspot, is like there wasn't a requirement necessarily that they use their name in the identifiers. So some of it is like, before you rush out and create your accounts and set things up, like think about whether, you know, and this comes into like, that's the big decision when they're setting up their domains at Grinnell, I'm sure, is like, what's going to come on the left side of that dot, that's going to represent my work. And so, you know, a lot of times it's like English 102. Yeah, because I'm doing this for English 102. So I just often would try to get them to think about like more broadly about what the space might represent, and the fact that it doesn't have to have their name, you know, it doesn't have to have Alan Levine's like website on the top, that I can create, again, a metaphorical space for my work.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. And in our context, we're just really at a point of beginning to open up more to student domains for various reasons. That has not been part of the package here, but going forward, I think we're going to see much more of that. And I think what you said, for example, about student work on important projects that make a difference would really resonate here. That we have a strong emphasis on undergraduate research, on community engagement projects. Our career department is known as Careers, Life, and Service. So it's very broadly conceived of encouraging students to think about their learning in the context of larger public issues and service to public issues. And in terms of thinking about openness, I think I try to encourage faculty to think of themselves as models, role models for the students on that. So if you make content that you've created shareable and discoverable, and you're in a position then um, to kind of authentically um, represent that for the students. So I mean, this is a small example, but earlier this morning we were working on Bill's website, and we added a section where he was posting his course syllabi. Now he's not using his site as a teaching platform or a course site, but just to make those syllabi for his courses discoverable is a way of sharing very valuable resources. But of course, he's a senior professor for 31 years, so I mean he has a you know a different frame of reference in terms of sharing out what he's done. But,
I way long ago, I used to do some of these presentations. I can't remember where this was happening about, the values of sharing online and some of these great things and trying to get people excited about the possibility of this. And so I kind of was a lot of times I lifted this idea from Dave Cormier where instead of having a slide up, I would have like a blank slide. And this was in one of these platforms where you could turn it into a whiteboard. And so, the question was like, what are the barriers to sharing? And so people could write on it anonymously.
yeah,
And it stayed with me so long is that nearly all the responses were concerns about um, my stuff isn't really that good, or it's not professional enough, or it's not really up to the quality of, fill in the name of some academic superstar. So there's a lot of like self-questioning of the value of people's own academic work, even for people who are like established academics, because um, they, whether you want to call it like, I hate the imposter syndrome a little bit about people often shut down before they even are ready to share, to say like my stuff isn't good enough, or like someone's gonna like look at it and criticize it, and I don't want that. So and that's out there too. So I think that's kind of almost a human trait. Like, I deal with it myself. Like, you
right,
know,
right.
like I question my self-worth on a regular basis in the darkness of the night. Um, but I think it helps to keep that in mind when you're sort of asking people like to share their work. That's a great comment, Liz.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so I mean, yeah, I look at all the people who are writing books now, and like, oh my gosh, I don't have the energy to write a book, much less an idea. Um, but my approach to it is like, well, I'm gonna like throw out lots of ideas, and like I'm not like I don't like always take myself so seriously, and so I like sometimes try to come off light or goofball, but like I think it's finding the vein that's again is going to work for you, and again trying to like be sharing openly, because person X out there isn't going to work. So like I was circling back to some of those questions. I was remembering some of the like the public projects that I remember. There was the one that UMW faculty did about like mapping all the those historical markers that you see, like you're driving down the highway and it's like an arrow for historical marker, and most people say like, oh, there's a historical marker there, and they keep on going. And so they had the students go out there and research, like first of all they geolocated them, but then they had to write up, investigate what that marker was about, and you build up this collection of something that's relevant to a geographical area. And there was a great Omeka project when I was working with faculty from Kenyon College, where they were doing all this research on a local cemetery. And like cemeteries are such great,
Yeah,
there's they're like such great things that lend themselves to doing these kind of documentation and research projects. There was the there's this thing called Dear Photo, where you take like an old photo of the house you grew up in, and you go back and visit it, and you hold up the photo in your hand, and you try to overlap it, and you get the comparison of the old and the new, and then you write a story that sort of talks about your memory of the space. And so that has a lot of potential for anybody doing like history of a town or a location. is to work off of that bridging of the digital now versus the analog
Yeah.
later. And so those kind of projects to me have a lot of appeal because they're relevant to where you live.
Right, right. I do want to segue here, looking at our time. I know we had some interest in spots, like I said,
Oh
and
yeah.
I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but and Tierney, you and Nick were having this discussion more yesterday. So if you would kind of maybe frame what
What the
what
heck are they?
well, no, I'm asking them maybe to frame the kind of the character of their interest in them, and then yeah, if you're willing to, again.
Sure. No, I can kind of just, do my usual thing as the professor, but I'll try to be very brief. Um, so hopefully I'm going to take a class to Spain next spring, um, COVID willing.
Wow.
And what I'd like to do, this is the second attempt. We didn't get to go in 2020. I'm really interested in the Splot idea of creating a sort of public facing window into that project. So it would be a way for us to put content, before and during and after the trip up there,
Hmm.
but have maybe potentially, outside interactions coming in as well. Um, I guess some questions I have is, what from my end, do I continue to moderate that? Like, can I get the kind of junk out there if it shows up or that kind of thing? And I'm also looking for something that's going to be very, very easy, small learning curve for the students because they have a lot of other things they're
Mhm.
dealing with in my class. We're doing some digital mapping and stuff, and I'm trying to avoid, having 19 tools that we're using. So the model looked really attractive to me yesterday when we were talking about that.
Yeah, and the real premise for it came when I had some fellowship time at Thompson Rivers University, and there, um, Brian Lamb kind of threw this idea at me the first night I got there, and so there were two interests. One was like getting away because in Canada there's the equivalent of FERPA is FIPA, and it's just about like can we have students do these activities online where they don't necessarily have to reveal their identity or create accounts? And so that was one piece. But the other was like, he introduced me, I'm forgetting his name right now, to an English professor who had his students do these writing assignments. And like to do two writing assignments, he had to like teach students all these intricacies of the WordPress interface. Like, and when you get a new WordPress site and you look at that, if it's the first time you've seen it I forget, it can be probably nauseating to know like what do I do here with this hello world thing and all these links on the side. And so I'll call him Nick. It's just like his question was like, can I just have a way for my students to write without them having to learn all this other junk? And so that was sort of like enough impetus for me to figure out can we create like a way for teachers or people who want to run these sites to use the power of WordPress in terms of the media handling without having to let students even see the inside of it. And so, the first one was the writing spot. So give for that, Ken was his name, now that I think about it, was to create like a place to publish something that, I found a theme that looked a little bit like Medium, but more or less give students the ability to write and post and do categories, et cetera, where they didn't have to create an account and they didn't even have to put their name on it. So they could be anonymous. And so that got extended to the collector, which is sort of focused on media because there were um, instructional designers were, again, Michelle, we're running a workshop on open license media. And they said, it would be great to have one of these ways for people to sort of like we send them out to find media. It'd be great to have a place for them to collect. And that could be what you want to do. Without having to like do a lot of legwork. And so again, it was making it, a form where they could upload the image, they could give it a title, write something, give the license that it was released upon. And so that just got later expanded. So now with that tool, you can give them the full, rich media editor. So sometimes people can use it to be more writing with a little piece of media to represent it, or sometimes just a piece of media. So there are people who have their students go out geography class where they find, landmarks and sort of write up a documentation of it. And some of that came from inspired by some work that Tom Woodward did at Virginia Commonwealth University, where there's a field botany class. So students are out in the field with their phones, but the teachers wanted some way for students to like take a picture of a river structure or a plant specimen and contribute it to a class resource and document what they're doing in the field. But the same thing is like you don't have to like throw students into WordPress to do that. So um, most of the spots sort of have that idea about some way of sharing some kind of content. And there's another one that does all kinds of media, so you can have video and audio and et cetera, the Spot box. But the moderating thing is there's sort of two ways to go about it. So um, if you want it to be like fully open to the public where anybody can contribute, you can set it up so all the stuff that comes in is as draft and you get a notification, and so that you can go in and you can publish the stuff you want to and delete the stuff you don't want to. um, the other way is you can have things immediately publish, but you put like a passcode on it, so your students, you communicate with them, when to be able to get to the form where you upload stuff, you have to enter this code. I mean, it's not like super rigorous, but that way, if you know that there's just specific people that you want to be contributing, like your students on the class trip to Spain, then their stuff is going to be published right away. And so that's going about it. But the main purpose is this idea about using what WordPress does well in terms of handling media and writing, um, but making it easier to do. And also like being like, usually it's for a single kind of task or activity or assignment. It's not necessarily like, it's not the full blown class platform. It's just like a focused tool that would be used. And so the more or less, when I was building these, I would look for themes that did work well on the mobile interface as well, because that's what a lot of people were contributing on. So, and and what's happened is that I had these certain ideas, or people came to me with these ideas about how to use it, and generally other people came up with approaches I never would have thought of. So that media collector, some colleagues at Coventry University in the UK were like, oh, we want it to be the place we want students to do their student intros, or people coming to our workshop or conference, we would ask them ahead of time to post whatever information about them that they wanted to share. And so it became like a conference directory. And people, I use the writing one for my students. I kind of picked up on this idea for a while. That I was reading about like this idea about like assignments where students like they're like writing articles for a fake magazine that I'm publishing. And so this idea about writing a publication that's not just for the class, but sort of like for the journal. Actually, the writer's block kind of has a little bit of an editing publishing workflow that works on it, because they submit things as draft and then I publish it to the site. So, Mo took some of the splots I did and took it as ways to, collect the, Grinnellians' experiences during the COVID. I saw a lot of that. I tried a few of those myself. And to me, that was ideal as well, because people could contribute stories fairly easily. And if they wanted to, they don't have to, again, put their name on it.
Yeah, and again, there was a library staff member who was moderating those. So if by the off chance something did come in that did not want to be part of the site, they were all submitted as drafts, so they weren't public until he had approved them.
Yeah. And sometimes you imagine like the worst case scenario first, like, oh my God, like, people are gonna put like porn on here or spam or ads, um and yeah, I can say it has happened. And so sometimes I do see that, but sometimes it helps to sort of like figure out like be ready for that, but not necessarily like put all the gates down to lock people in. But all these splots have been sort of like have that two approach structure to it, where you can sort of set some barriers around it, and it's reasonable. A lot of times it's not only because of bad stuff; it's because, well, sometimes students don't create the best titles for some of the stuff. It's like corner, you know, And so sometimes, I want to have some editorial oversight. Other times it's just more interesting to see what happens when you let things be open for people to share what they feel like sharing. And so a lot of it depends on, your sort of context and desires for the site or the activity. But yeah, it's kind of funny that people are still thinking about using. This was something that we started cooking up in 2014, um, but it basically it's leveraging the WordPress platform, and again the ability when you have a domain of your own is like, well, it's also WordPress, so you can put things into the site that aren't necessarily what I built as the functionality. So we've seen people build mini course sites around it, or they will put in plugins to add some functionality that aren't included. And so there's, because it's WordPress, you're not limited to the functionality that I put in there into the theme and the sharing. You can add other things to it. If you have the know-how, or you have people like Mo and Tierney, you can say, help me do this.
Yeah, I'm noticing too the comment Deborah made in the chat on a study abroad trip, trying to use the full WordPress. And Deborah, do you want to comment further on that?
It was just more in response. I mean, that was a while ago. It was in 2017, spring of 2017, and uh, I totally admit like not knowing all of the functionality of WordPress back then. So I just wanted to like both encourage Nick. I think it's a great idea to have students reflecting on those kind of opportunities. I don't think I did it very well because I was expecting more of kind of a classic assignment of like, writing and pictures. But I think by the time students got back from the trip, probably the timing was important too, because they came back and it was summer. So it was like there wasn't a lot of motive then to do the reflective work. So I think it would have been much more, but students did keep diaries, like physical paper diaries, while we were traveling. So I think having a way to have that more immediate portability, because we weren't, students didn't bring laptops. So I think being able to do something on your phone would be really perfect.
Yeah, and like it's gotten a little bit better, but like the WordPress mobile app, I still struggle with to use it. If I had to compose on it all the time, I would probably be yelling and screaming quite a bit. But lots of things that you can think about in terms of the media sharing that you may want students to do during that experience, or again as a capture device to if they're wanting to sort of like get things, because they're out there in the world and they're doing things, and you don't want them like having to spend so much time when they're experiencing these things. So as much as you can think about some ideas where they can sort of get enough where then they could write about it later when there is that time to reflect on it, but just sort of the capability of what we can do now in terms of like a note-taking, a media capture device is pretty astounding for even compared to what we could do a couple of years ago.
Any questions? Your fault. Yeah. So Nick, any further? Oh, that sounds good.
No, thank you. It's really helpful, and it's really gotten my gears turning. When we tried to approach this problem 2 years ago, I tried to do it through sort of like a GIS kind of, standpoint using Esri apps, and those were very complicated and, geared towards professional kind of use. And so I like this idea of maybe just like creating a place where we can kind of just dump stuff, and then later on we can go and we can, tease that out if it needs to go into ArcGIS or whatever. Ease of use, I think, is really the key, especially with the students today. Their suggestion was, well, let's just use TikTok or something. I mean, they're totally okay with that for the most part.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a way to balance some of that, and so that we're not relying on just third-party social media kind of to document the experience. There will be some of that, of course, on their own, but I don't know that I want the course to channel through that.
Yeah, depending how the way you want them to capture this comes into like, do I design categories that I want them to assign their stuff to, and or can I get them tagging their content in ways that would help connect them later in meaningful ways? You know, one of the things I never really got around to doing, which I always dreamt of, like I want to create like a playlist from some of the things in these media collections, like an ability to put together subsets of content.
Yeah, just a reminder, both the True Writer and the True Collector applications are feature applications that you can install from Installatron. So the setup is very
Yeah,
straightforward.
that was something that, you know, Reclaim did nicely. They sort of have the ability, and you know, Grinnell has this ability too to create like templates for sites again. So you know, if you're giving students the Hello World site with, you know, the 2021 theme, you have to go through all this explanation. But there's lots of places that are like, you know, if they're having students do portfolios, they sort of have starter sites that have at least some structure and relevance for the tasks that you're asking students to do.
Yeah, right now we just have one general WordPress template set up that goes out to all our users, but I think we will over this coming year look at some more fine-grained um, options that people could select when they're installing. Yeah. All right, well, we've just got a couple of minutes left. I want to be conscious of everyone's time. Again, I am not seeing any more in the chat. Anyone want to raise a well, now there is a question. What is
Oh,
the portfolio interface?
it's not a specific platform. It's just like you sort of set up like you know, you find a WordPress theme that you think would work well for students. I did some work with a university, and we kind of made like 3 or 4 different ones, and sort of like you populate it so you have the menus and categories that you want to students to sort of fill their portfolio with. And like the first page they see is going to, like, you know, this is your portfolio, this is where you should customize it, change, you know, the name. So instead of it just being an empty WordPress site that has just uncategorized as a category, you kind of pre-fill it with things. And so in some cases, you know, there's specific you know, assignments that students have to respond to. And so there might be already like starter pages, like, you know, you know, this is your art design, you know, storyboard assignment. And so you're giving them a little bit of a structure, like sometimes you give, you know, students a starting document that you want them to work with to do their composition from.
Yeah, Deborah, that's something we would set up here, and I'm happy to kind of, those who are interested, maybe collaborating on that. What would be an appropriate set of navigational and functional elements that would be in a theme like that? And it's pretty easy to create a template. I know that, I mean, for most students right now, approach careers, life, and service, particularly when they're fourth years, and they usually steer people toward Wix or Weebly or something like that, and which is fine if that meets their needs. It's, you know, it hurts me a little bit, but that's somebody's. But that's again, you know, you can put something up temporarily that looks pretty attractive.
I just remember like the first I was at UMW when they first rolled out Domain of One's Own, and like there was a year-end conference that was called Faculty Academy, where some of the students were sharing sort of their experience. And so it did strike me. One of the students had said like just getting the domain as a student, it was like hard to like, this has no meaning to me. What am I going to do with the domain? And so what Shannon said was like, what mattered was like going through maybe a year of different classes that were using it in a small way where they could see it make some, you know, relevance or sense to a particular assignment. And then like maybe a year later, it would start to click about to her as a student, like now I can sort of see about, I can get the ideas about what I might do for my own. And so sometimes if, you know, you're wanting students to do this across multiple classes, having them experience like some smaller scoped assignments, like, if they're going to go, with Nick to Spain and do this writing, or they're going to be experienced with Deborah, and they sort of get a small scale experience of publishing online. Ultimately, then it's be like, wow, I got this interest. Maybe I could use this for writing my own poetry, or for putting together, my Ferrari repair manual. And so it takes time in doing this in some relevant context. And then the idea is that students start to say like, wow, I can sort of see how I can apply this, do this into some other interest of my own. And Vanessa has a good experience. And so like schools that are doing this domain of one's own, um, Tim at Muhlenberg has spent a lot of time trying to come up with these community sites that can sort of be a mega directory. It gets a little bit tricky about like what has to be done to sort of be able to know what sites are being created within a domain of one's own instance, because there's not like a database where it all gets published to, but there are some ways, and there are some examples of sites. I think, probably I have to check with the folks at Oklahoma University, that yeah, so there is an example there, but that is another sort of thing to think about, is like, people are doing these experiences on their own in a class or on a project, and so like, what are some ways that can be shared? Again, that gets to, first of all, they have to be okay with it, but it helps to sort of get a sense that you're part of something bigger.
Yeah, that
Uh,
occurred to me when I went on the Wayback Machine, because we were talking about the Teal Day sites yesterday, and I went back on the Wayback Machine and I looked up University of Florida, and they had something called Grove, which, being Florida, orange groves, whatnot. Anyways, and in there they basically just had a listing of everyone who had signed up for a web page and to create a web page, and then you could just kind of go click through all the names and see what sorts of things people built. I mean, some of them basically their website was, hello world kind of stuff, but
Right.
and that was it. But others of them had some really interesting things, and just being able to kind of click through and see all the different stuff people are doing. I'm just wondering if that would help address some of the concern of like, well, what am I supposed to do with my site? So when you're able to see what other people are doing, it could like stimulate ideas.
yeah, we were going to look at that actually on Monday, because we did a kind of a gallery tour of other Grinnell sites beyond those of the participants. And the Muhlenberg site, a beautiful thing that Tim Clark built, but it's under reconstruction, so there wasn't anything to see there.
I just went to find the link and it was done. Another approach that's worked well, I've seen, I think Coventry does this in Oklahoma. They actually have like, they give awards like at the end of the year
The
to some of
Creaties.
yeah. And so that's a great sort of form of recognition as well.
Yeah. Okay, folks, any kind of final observations or comments while we have Alan here?
You've all been very kind. I sometimes don't feel like I've said anything useful.
Oh no,
See, I have my own imposter syndrome going. Okay.
you're being far too modest there. Let's see. Yeah, we've got a little action going on in the chat there. Yeah, WordPress sites are pretty what's migratable. Um, one of the things that's interesting is to see, if students get a domain in college, or what percentage of them keep it and keep using it. At my previous institution, I know I taught a course, and we actually used Feed WordPress and some of the stuff you built, Alan, in a course on how the web works. And out of the 20, I know, I think 3 of them. So I mean, that's 2 or 3. That's fine. I'm happy with that. But so. It's their own agency, and like you were saying earlier,
It's pretty low, and not to like keep chilling, reclaim hosting, but if they're going from a domain site at Grinnell and they say like, I want to like move this to my own domain, The folks at Reclaim can do it very cleanly for you. But again, yeah, there are means to get your WordPress sites exported if you want to move it to anywhere else. There's approaches as well for sometimes if the site is done, you don't need to be kept as WordPress. There's ways to go about and have it be converted to sort of like static HTML, so at least you get a snapshot reference. But it's good if people are thinking about the archiving aspect.
Yeah. Well, we've got people cutting out to go to other commitments. So I would mention that, and my colleague Tierney, part of this, and Liz earlier, we do have a kind of a student cohort group. We hope to really expand this year. That's going to be doing a lot more work with domains. So we're excited about that. But Alan, I want to thank you. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you for letting me blab.
Yeah, it's been fun to have you with us, and I know in the midst of the many kind of balls up in the air for you, you're always, we can always reach out and
Definitely,
and pick your brain about things, and of course follow you at Cogdog Blog and elsewhere.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So,
thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thanks again, and
Go Grinnell.
Well, thanks a lot, pioneers. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.